The video you're about to watch is taken from a game at the 2019 FIDE World Rapid and Blitz Chess Championship, where Anish Giri of the Netherlands played the white pieces against Alireza Firouzja of Iran. You'll notice some big names and faces like Kramnik Carlsen, MVL, and Nakamura in the background, but as stated, this analysis is about the game closest to our cameraman. After an English move order, we quickly head into what looks like a King's Indian developing on the board, and indeed after d4, castles, bishop e2, and e5, we're in one of the most well-known and common openings in the history of chess. D takes e5 is the first topical choice, if you will, whereas both d5 and bishop e3 are more common moves in the database. Now, Firouzja thinks about taking with the pawn, but then chooses to take with the knight. Perhaps he was considering to repeat what MVL did, speaking of the man playing the black pieces in the background, in the 2019 Pro Chess League. But as said, he takes with the knight and invites further exchanges from Anish Giri. After bishop to e3, we're now in a battle of what will be who can control the d-file and who gets access to these critical squares first. White would love to put a rook on d1 and perhaps a pony on d5. Black likewise would love to control the d-file, stop white from accessing d5, and maybe even control the dark squares further down the road. In order to do that, though, you might have to get rid of this bishop on e3, hink hink wint wint, at the plan that Firouzja comes up with. Bishop e6 overprotects d5. Anish Giri clearly prepares to put a rook on the d1 square. Firouzja plays c6, forever trying to deny the pony this key positional move of knight to d5. And after b4, for those most studious of you, you'll observe that this is a novelty in terms of the move order. However, it's not a novel idea at all, as white expands on the queen side, looking to gain space with a pawn storm and pretty much every mainline King's Indian. Now, in this position, white will still at some point be putting a rook on d1, and Firouzja decides it's time to put a rook on e8. One idea is to free the f8 square, the other is to overprotect e5, especially when you end up seeing what his future plan is. Here comes the rook to d1, and after queen to c8, Firouzja's thinking about things on the king side, perhaps even offering a trade on g4, and so Anish Giri says, "Nah, I'm not interested. I'm going to stop you from accessing that point." Firouzja plays h5, which at first might seem like a crazy idea of a pawn storm, but after rook a to b1, we see the plan becoming clear. King h7 intends to put a bishop on h6 and do what I foreshadowed. If I can get rid of this bishop, not only is d4 easier to access, but I've also lessened white's control over this critical diagonal on the queen side. This is enough of a creative idea to give Anish Giri a think, as you can see here. But ultimately, after some time, he actually comes up with what the engine suggests is indeed the best. Ignore the kid's plan and go for the pawn storm on the queen side. a4 gains space, just as you should do where you have the advantage. Always look to gain space on the side of the board where you already have control. But it doesn't faze Firouzja from playing bishop h6 and going for this rather creative idea of allowing the king to come all the way up onto a diagonal where white can simply check the king. However, this was not just Potzer c-check, Potzer play check. Giri has a very, very strong idea. After the move a5, queen c7, and queen e3, we see the queen has actually replaced the bishop's purpose of hitting this diagonal. The fact that the queen is hitting a7 makes it very hard for Firouzja to want to challenge the d-file, because if a trade happens and the rook takes, ultimately the a7 pawn will fall. Just like our cameraman might fall if she continues to roam around the room instead of focusing on the game that we'd like. Queen takes d8 was still a move that Firouzja could have gone for and perhaps relocated the queen to this square, but instead, as we can now see on the board, Firouzja actually panicked over the a7 pawn and played the move b6. Giri takes some time here, ultimately does not come up with what the move is that is actually best. You can see it at my blog. b5 instantly here is very, very strong. But playing a6 also makes a lot of sense. You're trying to create the potential of a long-term pass pawn, as well as keep this a7 pawn under target for the future. Firouzja follows with rook a to d8. After all, that was the whole point of playing b6, to block the queen from attacking a7. But Giri decides it's time to play c5 to renew some protection of that very far advanced Peshka. And so Firouzja says, no, I'm not going to let the bishop continue to protect that pawn. However, there's a lot of tension building here around whether or not this a pawn will become a key player for white or a key weakness for black. Giri plays the move rook to d6, a very strong idea, where either you must allow him to double, owning the only open file, or you're going to have to make an exchange that reopens my queen, who I replaced with the bishop. Firouzja makes the initially right decision to trade on d6, however now plays the move queen to b6, which could have been a blunder that was his undoing. After queen takes b6 and a takes b6, Giri could have played the move rook to a1, as we're about to see on the board. This move would have been the most accurate, again, as the analysis at my blog entails, because the a-pawn is very hard to stop, along with the potential threats at the d-pawn. However, Giri gets a little excited here and goes for the piece sacrifice with bishop takes b5. You can tell Firouzja is surprised by this move, as he gives a little bit of a shuffle there in his chair. What he's analyzing, however, is whether, after taking on b5 and knight takes, he has the means to stop both of these pawns. The risk, of course, for white is that if these pawns fail, you're literally playing a position with two minors versus one. And ultimately, even if it's objectively okay for white, from a practical perspective, it's much easier to play black. However, these pawns, as said, are very, very strong. There's a threat of knight to c7 immediately hitting the rook and preparing to shepherd the a-pawn up the board, as well as the idea of eventually bringing the rook to a more useful square than b1, either a1, c1, or d1. We see Firouzja hesitated, but ultimately finds the best move according to the engine, rook a8. This move stops knight c7 from just being winning on the spot, because after the move is played, rook a7 can slow down the passed a-pawn. Now we see Giri's struggle. These two pawns, while very strong, and optically doing much to tie down black's pieces, as everybody is worried about either the advance of the a or the d pawn, he lacks a clear plan, as he leans in here to think he's not sure what to do. Black is threatening to take the e4 pawn, as well as perhaps eventually bring the king to this side of the board with moves like knight to e8 and trade. Giri decides to first defend e4, which makes sense, but now after the move bishop to d7, preparing pressure on this diagonal, Giri decides, before reinforcing the protection of the pawn, I should improve my rook by putting it on the c-file. This is a good move, and with best play from here on out, the position probably should have been a draw. We'll see that Firouzja takes his time before ultimately playing the move I foreshadowed, which is that this king should probably get involved in the defensive action over here on the king side, the queen side. King to f8 is played, but after Giri takes a moment to find the move b5, which overprotects a6, and puts black in a tough spot, Firouzja plays a plan that was probably losing if Giri had found the computer line, but we're not going to show that till the end of the game, so stick around if you want to see the move order that Giri didn't find in order to ultimately put Firouzja away. Alireza should have played the move knight to e8, and in some fun variations that involve rook to c7, taking would of course lose on the spot for black. We get a fancy draw in variations like this, where the threats of rook to b8 and attacking the bishop back and forth will ultimately lead to a repetition of moves. As said though, Firouzja did not go for knight e8, he played the move knight to g8. Now this is an interesting idea. He wants to play f6, bring the knight to h6, and head to f7, where it undermines the d6 pawn. Giri sees this plan coming and doesn't know what to do, and hence the massive time scramble we're about to see. But after king to f2 and f6, as I said, h4, knight h6, there was a winning move in this position for Giri that he did not find, and it was not knight d5. Stick around to find out what it was. This move is a trade offering of both d6 and b5 for b6. Unfortunately for Giri, that's too little too late. He takes on b6, but gives up b5 in the process, and as we see in the background, Magnus decides to step up and get his stretch on in the process. Here comes rook to c8 check, and on king to c7, we see that white is not only about to lose a6, but that advancing the d-pawn also doesn't work with black's double protection over the square. Black finds the move rook to c5, and after bishop takes a6, d7, but here comes rook to b7. Too many pieces are being attacked. It's too late for Giri. Rook to c6 guards the knight. Bishop to b5, rook d6 takes advantage of the fact that the knight can't take because of a queen, but it's just fancy tricks because rook b8 overprotects everything, and after the move rook d5, rook takes b6, Anish Giri realizes he has nothing left but a two-piece disadvantage, and at most he can just get one of them back. But as I promised, there was a winning move for Giri that's actually quite amazing, and you're going to want to see what it is as the two players sign their score sheet for the FIDE Arbiter. In this position, taking advantage of a long knight's journey, and while that piece is on the other side of the board, white had the brilliant move rook to c6. Now, this move threatens to win a third pawn for the piece and then completely crush forward with these two passers. And if the move bishop takes c6 is played captures, knight f7 is now too slow because of the brilliant line that occurs with d7, king e7, d8, queen, and then c7. And in the end, as we see these two guys who clearly shop at Slender Men Are Us, modeling for them, I hear, coming very, very soon, white would have been winning if Giri had seen this variation. Understandable, however, that he didn't. He settled on knight d5 as pointed out, and we're going to settle on the fact that whatever variations they were analyzing, it probably was not rook to c6, given how hard that move would be to find right after the game. So, critical moments in this game include knight to f7 not being spotted by Giri, his panicking of the plan, and ultimately not finding the knockout blow. But an interesting piece sack it was, and perhaps an opportunity blown for the man from the Netherlands. Hope you enjoyed this analysis breakdown. They say it takes a fool to want to analyze Blitz, but when it comes to videos like this and what the Chess.com team was able to do on site in Moscow, I guess I'm just the fool for you. Leave a message, leave a comment, share the video. We love you. We thank you. More of these videos coming your way from the work we've done on site, as well as some other Blitz archives we pulled up. I appreciate your time, and we'll see you around on Chess.com.